Today's event is hosted by the SIF. I'll introduce the team in order of appearance. As I've said, I'm Paul Hartman. I'm the lead for the Nature, People, and Climate Investment Program. And I'll be handling the first part of the event, which is the IP presentations and a couple of questions. We will then have a panel that'll be moderated by my colleague on the NPC team, Chitembo Chunga, who's a senior climate specialist for the Nature and Resilience programs. And then finally, there'll be a wrap-up by Anita Ramachandran, who is a learning platform coordinator for the Nature, People, Climate program. Next slide, please. So the SIF and Nature, People, Climate Investment Program have been introduced in more detail in previous editions of the Nature series. And you'll find these on our YouTube page. Maybe we can put that into the chat bar. So this, as I mentioned, this webinar is intended for SIF members and those who should be familiar with the program, but I'm going to take a few moments to briefly introduce the Nature, People, Climate program as a refresher. So the NPC is a program supporting nature-based solutions to climate change. As the name implies, we're focused on deploying nature. So how can you use ecosystem function and processes, aka nature, as a solution to climate change, particularly for adaptation and mitigation? People, which is about driving benefits to the populations within the defined landscapes and seascapes. And then, of course, the SIF is a climate financing mechanism, so our ultimate goal is about furthering low carbon and climate resilient development. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a focus on how you can think about nature-based solutions, which is using a climate lens is not sufficient to get at the nature-based solutions. You really need there to be a nature lens. So as you think about your climate and development challenges and the action you want to take, you want to filter that through a lens of how you can use protection, management, or restoration of lands and coastal areas and seas as a solution. So how do you engage nature in order to achieve mitigation and adaptation benefits, mitigation going down, adaptation vulnerability going down, and resilience going up? Next slide, please. Just a little bit about the NPC program itself. We received about 48 expressions of interest, which represented more than 50 countries, or over a third of the developing world. So there is a lot of interest in nature-based solutions. From this, our board selected 7 countries in a region to be recipients of funding to develop IPs and then to implement those IPs. And you'll see those countries here listed. And then 2 countries, Zambia and Namibia, at the moment have funding for the investment plan development with funding for implementation still pending. Also want to mention that in addition to the funds that go through the government investment plan, there is a separate window, a grant mechanism that's for indigenous people and local communities. And at the moment, there's about $40 million in that for the 8 programs and global component of that. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this webinar is part of our NPC learning platform, and the objectives are to build understanding of nature-based solutions broadly within the community of interested SIF countries, to facilitate peer-to-peer exchange on nature-based solutions, particularly South-to-South exchange, as we're trying to do today, and to develop new analytical content and evidence on what works for nature-based solutions. Next slide. So today we're gonna focus on 2 investment plans that were approved at our June Trust Fund Committee meeting, our board meeting. These 2 investment plans total together about $61 million in funding. They were part of the SIF's NPC program. They are the Dominican Republic, which received the investment plan is for $30 million. And you can see that on the right, the photo on the right, and then on the left is Rwanda, which has a $31 million plan. These plans also identified about $500 million in expected co-financing, and they'll pilot nature-based solutions to improve land use, bridge climate mitigation and adaptation, and develop sources of livelihood for rural communities and indigenous people. Next slide, please. So the objectives today are about today's webinar about facilitating learning between NPC countries on the process of developing investment plans, including hearing directly on lessons learned in the process, bringing light to Rwanda and the DR's efforts to increase what they're doing within these two plans, and enhancing understanding of SIF's NPC investment program, its design and goals. Next slide. So the agenda, as I mentioned, there'll be presentations by the IP countries themselves. First, we'll hear from Rwanda, then we'll hear from the Dominican Republic. There'll be a couple of short questions, and then there'll be a panel discussion with Q&A. And this is really the opportunity for you as well to provide your questions for the panelists. Next slide. So our two country speakers from the countries from Rwanda is Emily Awasi. She's a climate finance analyst at the Rwanda Green Fund. And as a finance analyst, Emily plays a key role in mobilizing funds from various donors, including the SIF. She's also a member of the SIF's Trust Fund Committee. She sits on our GCAP, which is the board that'll be reviewing IPs. So not only did her country submit an IP, for future IPs, she'll be one of the reviewers of the ones that are coming in. Next slide. Our second presenter will be Rodrigo Finchiera. He's a senior advisor to the Executive Vice President of Climate Change and Climate Council of Dominican Republic. Rodrigo's goal is to transform society by making development worthwhile for all. He's an economist by profession, but also an entrepreneur who's working in recycling and construction. And he's been very involved in the community, working and chairing NGOs from 2013 to 2020. Rodrigo has been engaged in climate change in the DR since 2020. He's also a SIF Trust Fund Committee member since 2021 and has been recently appointed the co-chair of the SIF's Clean Technology Fund. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily. Miriam, you can hit the next slide, and then Emily can take the stage. Emily, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. I hope you can hear me. My name is Emily. Thank you for the good introduction, and I'm so happy and honored to be presenting the Rwandan IP to my fellow colleagues, especially in recipient countries that are in the process of creating their own IP. Okay, Miriam, next, please. Okay, so I'll talk about the country context of Rwanda. As some of you may know, we're a small landlocked country in central eastern part of Africa. Our approach to our IP, from our expression of an interest a couple years ago to our scoping mission, to our joint mission, to finally submitting to the GCAP committee this summer. I'll also talk about the projects, the four components that make this IP, as well as this innovative bond that we have that's in the IP. I'll touch on the theory of change, and after finally the financing plan of how we plan to use this 31 million USD and how it's going to be divided in all four components. I'll also talk about the challenges and successes we encountered while creating this IP. Yeah. Next, please. Okay. So the country context, yes, next, please. Okay, so like I said, Rwanda itself is extremely vulnerable to climate change. But more specifically, the southern province has the highest rate of poverty in the country, but also has the highest incidence of flooding and landslides erosions in the country. Rwanda itself is a very hilly country, so and very densely populated. I believe it's the third most densely populated country in Africa. So people kind of live in a disorganized manner, so in very risky zones. So this is what makes the southern part of Rwanda even more vulnerable to a landslide or a flooding. Next, please. Okay, so and that's why we chose really to specifically use the seed funding, the $31 million in it's called the Kaduha-Gitwe corridor, but pretty much is the southern part of Rwanda. Like I said, very steep slopes and really high risk of soil erosion, flooding, and landslides. Extremely high poverty levels, making the population even more vulnerable to a simple rainfall. But also this area is also strategically located because it has great biodiversity in the southern region. So we have two national parks, the Volcanoes National Park and the Nyungwe National Park. So really this area, if we go about it the right way, we can really make this transformational impact with starting with the seed funding. Next, please. Okay, so approach to our IP development. Like I said, the process itself was pretty intense, 2 years. So our expression of interest actually was a couple years ago, but maybe let me just paint a picture of how we got to the final product this summer. So after receiving, putting out our expression of interest, like Paul mentioned, we were chosen to be one of the few countries to actually receive this funding. Right after that, we started working and we had the scoping mission where the MDBs came to Kigali and we sat down and really thought about, okay, where should this money go in Rwanda? We looked at the northern parts where we have a really good IDA project. Our TTL Edison will touch also upon that. We looked at the eastern part of Rwanda, which we have really good agricultural projects going on, and we finally settled on the southern part of Rwanda. And this was a whole government approach where with stakeholders, we said, okay, why not use this funding to really channel to the most vulnerable population in Rwanda? And that's how Rwanda came about to this decision for the geographical location. After that, we continued working. We hired a consultancy firm to really help us with, again, as you may know, the IP is really a lot of intensive work and really time consuming, and to really help us, okay, look at the key components. What could this IP compromise of? We went on the field with the district officials, MDBs, and the consultants, and kind of looked at what the problem areas were. After that, we held a joint workshop in Kigali. Mr. Paul was present, and about 80 to 90 other stakeholders. So I'll talk a bit more about the stakeholders in the next slide. But after that, we started drafting the actual investment plan. And with the first draft of the investment plan, we opened it up to the public. We published it on our website, but also sent individual emails to the stakeholders for anybody who would want to comment upon it. And then after that, that's when we presented to the Trust Fund Committee. Next, please. Miriam, next slide. Okay, thank you. So yes, so the stakeholders engagement. So we had stakeholders from 5 main groups. So local governments, those are the district, central government, Ministry of Agriculture, Environment, Ministry of Finance, civil society organizations, academia, and as well as development partners. And as you know, at the Green Fund, we mobilize money, of course, from the MCFs, but also from bilateral partners such as SIDA, DANIDA, that are on the ground in Rwanda, and as well as the private sector. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the investment plan now. So our investment plans, like I said, comprise of 4 main objectives. Number 1, restore degraded landscape in the southern province. As I said, again, the southern province has really been victim of extreme weather patterns, so either extreme drought or extreme rainfall. So the lands, the acidity of the land is actually one of the most acidic in Africa. Number 2, to promote sustainable land use management of forest and wetlands. And as I previously mentioned, because Rwanda is so densely populated, you see people inhabiting right next to the wetlands. Number 3, improve diversity and rural livelihoods, looking at how we can add value to some of the agricultural products that will be will be made during the IP. And lastly, financial innovation efforts, which is the this kind of chimpanzee bond that we're trying to make happen. So next slide, please. Yes. So to maybe make it make more sense, our IP has kind of two broad umbrella terms. So we want to have resilient landscapes, of course, this is nature-based solution, but also resilient livelihoods. So how can people adapt to these extreme weather patterns? So I will talk about that again in the next slide. So next, please. Okay, so in the 31 million USD that was given by the CIF, we have again one project is the first project has four components. Okay, so the first project catalyzing climate and nature-based investment for resilient landscape and communities. So the two I talked about, and the second project we have a $2 million specifically for the wildlife conservation bonds. Okay, next. So maybe to talk about the wildlife conservation bond, this has been a bond that was first tested in South Africa for the rhino conservation bonds, and we're looking at how this innovative instrument can take away again pressure from government. Uh, Government balance sheets and really create and bring in more money without us taking the risk. Next, please. Okay, so theory of change, Miriam, you're gonna have click to until the square is completed, is populated. Okay. Okay, maybe this one for it to make sense. So, like I said, the two umbrella terms, resilient landscape and resilient livelihoods. Again, for the first project, okay, catalyzing the NPC for resilient landscapes and livelihood, we have four components under it. So integrated catchment and landscape restorations, ecological restoration of priority conservation areas, and then livelihood diversification, where we do the value addition to some of the products, and then the wildlife conservation bonds. So for the first project, our outcomes again to have again natural forests protected, resilient impact on the population, to have carbon sequestrated, and to also be able to, improve the biodiversity of Rwanda. Again, some of the inputs would be, again, technical expertise and fit for purpose solutions. And maybe what I can say about this is that, again, because the IP takes a year to 2 years, sometimes the reality on the grounds might have changed. So even after this, with the help of our TTL and MDBs, we'll review on the ground if this can be, again, adapted to the reality of right now of when the implementation actually starts. Next slide, please. Okay, so maybe I can talk about the CIF financing. How do we plan on splitting up the 31 million? So the first component, integrated catchment and landscape restoration, will have majority of almost over half of the funding, which is again the main solution that we want for the southern province. Second component will receive about 4.3 million USD, and which is ecological restoration of priority conservation areas. Livelihood diversification will receive about $5.8 million, and then project management, monitoring and evaluation, capacity building, and gender mainstreaming will receive about 1.2 million USD. Like I said, the conservation wildlife conservation bond will receive 2 million. Next. Okay, and then now the co-financing. As our TTL Ellison likes to say, the size of Rwanda really makes this possible for us to have a good comprehensive co-financing, because it's about the same size as Maryland. So we have a few good projects that's going on again in that corridor area. So southern parts, but also going upstream. So we have a EIB and IDA project, which is called the Volcanoes. It's called VCRP, so Volcanoes Community Resilience Project. With that, some of the co-financing again from EIB and IDA and ProGreen. We have the JEF8 project, and then we are counting on the Wildlife Conservation Bond foreground coupons. Next. Okay, so thank you, but maybe I was also asked to talk about some of the challenges and some of the successes we encountered before I pass on to my colleague Rodrigo from the DR. So some of the challenges, again, we looked at the southern province of Rwanda. So I think the first instinct that comes to mind is that the geographical location, again, $31 million is a lot, but not that much, right? So really how to limit to have, again, specific geographical location to be able to maximize and really see the impact of the money. So not just spread out too thin, trying to do everything. So with that also is to limit the number of components. So again, you see that it's 4. Again, because when it comes to implementation, more components can seem good and well when presenting an IP, but implementing more than 4 components, 4 or plus components might also be a bit challenging. Maybe less challenges is to be diligent on the co-financing. Is this co-financing really superficial? Is it real that it will add value to these SIF projects? Some of the successes. So I think in Rwanda, we were very lucky. We had really good MDBs that we worked very well with, and they advised us on too many things. So from components to stakeholders engagement on how to really go about to creating a really strong IP. And with that, we also had our CIF colleagues when we sent in our draft IP, Paul and his team to really review it and give us additional comments to really strengthen the IP to the quality that CIF wants it to be at. I mean, CIF is expecting it to be at, yeah. And the last success I can say is that we took advantage, again, of our small country size, but to work with other multilateral climate funds. So we have the JEF8 project, we have the LDCF project, also from the JEF, and we have this GCF project. So really, how do we, say, okay, these projects are all, in some way adaptation measures. So how do we work together and even in our joint mission to bring other MCFs on board and see how can these projects work together instead of being fragmented and in silos. So I think that was a really good success for Rwanda, that it's a part, I can say, maybe part luck and part preparation that's really made this strong IP. And that's it for my part. So thank you, colleagues.
Thank you so much, Emily, for that really interesting presentation and the preparation of a very strong, comprehensive investment plan. Before we move to Rodrigo, I want to remind everyone we will have a question and answer session during the panel. But please, as you have questions, feel free to put them in to the chat. Again, this is an opportunity, particularly for those who are working directly on IPs, to ask any question you might have, everything you ever wanted to know about the IP process, but we're afraid to ask. Again, it's a small, it's a CIF community. Many of the folks who are participating are in a similar position. So feel free to ask your questions, and hopefully you can hear directly from Emily and Rodrigo, as well as later on from our MDB colleagues who help to support them. So with that, I think we will turn this over next to Rodrigo Finchiera from the Dominican Republic. Rodrigo, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. I wanted to share our IP with you guys, but before I start the presentation, I wanted audience and members who are working on their IPs to keep in mind some of the things we did. So when you're seeing the presentation, you realize that we try to keep the interlinkages between nature, people, and climate, and understood that they are truly complex and they're an interconnected system. So this IP try to make stronger connections between them. We had a lot of actors across the board that had very different interests. Our country has 5 prioritized watersheds, and we need to find the one that would give us the biggest overall impact. So these actions were identified as soon as possible. Having that said, next slide, please.
Siempre mi trabajo ha dependido del mar. Con eso crié mi familia y todavía me sigo beneficiando de lo que el mar aporta. Estábamos teniendo muchas dificultades por la deforestación de los manglares, afecta mucho las especies marinas.
Este es el río Yuna, la fuente de agua corriente más caudalosa de República Dominicana. Su cuenca es la segunda más importante del país. Ocupa el 11% del territorio nacional. 1 de cada 5 dominicanos vive en la cuenca del Yuna. Allí se produce la mayor parte del arroz del país y casi el 100% de la exportación de cacao. Y 18 áreas protegidas están vinculadas a su cuenca. Pero varios desafíos amenazan su potencial.
El principal problema de la cuenca alta del río Yuna es la pobreza de las familias que viven aquí. Tradicionalmente han vivido de una agricultura de subsistencia. Se ha sembrado indiscriminadamente, no se desarrolla ninguna práctica de conservación de suelo, a niveles que la gente en los últimos años ha tenido que abandonar la loma.
Entre los principales desafíos está la degradación de los servicios ecosistémicos, la pobreza y el cambio climático.
Nuestra cuenca tiene una gran zona agrícola donde el principal rubro que se cultiva es el arroz. Este es el que viene a garantizar la seguridad alimentaria del país.
Los problemas de deforestación y contaminación de las cuencas alta y media terminan afectando a quienes viven y trabajan en la desembocadura del río por la sedimentación.
Viene a terminar aquí a la bahía de Samaná, afectando indirectamente a todas las poblaciones que tenemos aledañas.
Además, la zona es muy vulnerable a eventos naturales por el cambio climático, especialmente inundaciones, que afectan al sector productivo y también a las viviendas de los vecinos de la cuenca.
Hemos tenido algunos problemas por el cambio o por la naturaleza, mejor dicho. Todos los problemas eran conectados con el medio ambiente.
El gobierno de República Dominicana, con el apoyo del Grupo Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo y el Grupo Banco Mundial, está trabajando en un plan de inversión en la cuenca del Yuna. El plan promueve un enfoque de la loma a la bahía, donde las acciones de restauración y conservación en la cuenca alta tengan impactos positivos para la naturaleza en las cuencas media y baja. El plan busca promover el manejo integral, resiliente y bajo en carbono de la cuenca a través de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Por ejemplo, impulsar el fortalecimiento de la capacidad institucional para mejorar la gobernanza y la gestión integrada de la cuenca. Además, propone restaurar y conservar los ecosistemas, incluyendo mecanismos de pago por servicios ambientales. Y por último, diversificar la economía de un modo positivo para la naturaleza, a través del desarrollo del ecoturismo y de la economía azul.
Todas las actividades que se hagan aquí tienen que hacerse tendente a una producción sostenible.
Y esto genera también empleo indirecto y directo. Por ejemplo, llevar personas que vienen al ecoturismo, llevarlo a visitar los manglares, a hacer avistamiento de aves.
Se espera que el plan logre restaurar y conservar los servicios ecosistémicos, fortalecer la resiliencia y fomentar oportunidades económicas positivas para la naturaleza, para tener una cuenca más sostenible y resiliente. Lograr el bienestar de la gente, el dinamismo y la prosperidad económica.
Si con la fuerza de voluntad todos cooperamos con evitar la deforestación de los manglares, podría haber un futuro mejor.
So next slide, please. So as I was saying before, government has 5 prioritized watersheds. Yuna watershed has about 1 in 5 Dominicans that live of it, and occupies about 11% of our territory. Next slide, please. We found that there was a vicious cycle between poverty and degradation of ecosystems, and that this was also triggered or in height by climate change, which kept this vicious cycle running more firmly or roughly. Next slide, please. In this Yuna watershed, 30.5% of the population live in levels of poverty, and 50% of the population lives in moderate poverty as well. Next slide, please. %65% of soils are degraded, and we've lost a great deal of natural forests. Next slide, please. The cost of climate change in the Yuna watershed has been enormous. And in 2023, by instance, we had Hurricane Fiona that was very harsh on this area, flooding most of it. So $700 million were part of the loss due to Fiona. Next slide, please. So our objectives for this IP with the IBD group, we're trying to fix the restoration and conservation of ecosystems through the Yuna watershed. With the grant part of this, we are going to elaborate and actualize the plans for managing protected areas in the watershed. And with the loan part of this, we are going to implement nature-based solutions in the watershed and in the low part of the watershed. And we are also going to work with the mechanism for environmental services payments to give money back to the communities, which will help maintain this economic services, environmental services. Next slide, please. With the help of the World Bank Group, we are going to support resilience to climate, to communities and their livelihoods, diversifying their economics with a positive strain in nature. With the grant part, we're going to elaborate strategies of development in sectors of the watershed, like ecotourism and blue economy. And with the loan part of it, we're going to make investments in those ecotourist programs and in those blue economic programs, certainly vising the fisheries of the watershed. Next slide, please. We are going to have a strong leadership from the Ministry of Environment, and this will guarantee we will guarantee the participation of local communities in the decision making and managing of natural resources. We have aligned this to promote investments, private and collective and public, to better serve the whole watershed. And we are going to bring additionality by in innovation and scaling blue scale economies and the payment for environmental services and ecotourism to this. We think and we target to achieve a 130,000 cubic meters of CO2 sequestered by implementing this IP. Our co-financing is going to reach about 290 million, invested primarily in the integral management of the middle of the watershed and through best practices on our agriculture sector. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. It was lovely. Not last slide. The reflection of this picture, I want to leave with participants and colleagues. Having done this IP preparation project was a very interesting project, and we had a lot of co-working between very different institutions, and it formed strong links between all the participants in the project. And I wish you guys can have the same experience while participating in your own IPs. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Rodrigo. And it's really how well this program has driven that landscape approach. You and I have discussed this, but many on the participants will have seen my initial slide of the ridge to reef approach, and this program really does mirror that to almost a T. Of course, not every country has a coastal area that where they're working, but the integrated nature, understanding how different parts of the system interact with other parts of the system is super clear in what was presented, and of course through that very, very powerful video. So with that, I think we'll now turn it over to the panel discussion. My colleague Chitembo Chunga will now take the lead, and very briefly, I think we're doing okay for time, but please briefly introduce our two additional panelists. And Chitembo, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Greetings, everyone. And we've listened to Emily and Rodrigo. Thank you, colleagues, for the presentations, for highlighting what you went through. But I'd want to add two additional members who will join the panel. That's Ellison from the World Bank. He's a senior environmental finance specialist with over 20 years of public and private sector experience. He currently co-leads the Wildlife Conservation Bond operation in South Africa, collaborates on efforts to mobilize finance at scale for nature and climate action, and provides technical assistance to operational teams in Africa, the Middle East, and North Africa and South Asia on issues related to innovation finance, public-private partnerships, and environmental risk management. Another colleague from the MDBs that worked with the DRI is Benoit, who's sector senior specialist for climate change and sustainable development. He's an urban economist and an engineer in agronomics, working as a senior specialist at the Climate Change Division of the Inter-American Development Bank. He's currently based in the country office of the Dominican Republic. His work focuses on design and implementation of national and local policy and investment in all sectors of the bank, and on improving climate friendliness of IDB group operations for both mitigation and adaptation, leveraging climate finance and catalyzing private investment in clean and resilient solutions. So the four experts here will share with us what the journey has been developing the IPs for the Dominican Republic and for Rwanda. And we want this session to really bring out more issues that may not have been covered by our colleagues that made the presentations from the governments, and to delve more how they collaborated with the MDBs and how this would enrich we colleagues that are still in the process of developing our IPs. And to start our discussion, I'll first go to Benoit from the IDB who worked with the Dominican Republic government. We've heard how interesting it was to come up with the reach to reef, which is an interesting synonym for theme for the IP for Dominican Republic. Would you share with the audience, how did you engage stakeholders, including indigenous peoples and local communities, the private sector and civil society in designing this plan? What insights would you give colleagues that are still in the process of developing the plan? Benoit?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question, and thanks for the invitation from the CIF. Hello to colleagues, especially from Rwanda and from around the world. So thanks a lot for this opportunity, and please do not hesitate. I think that the idea of this webinar is also to interact, so I will welcome any question in French, in Spanish, in English. Happy to share. So for your question on how to engage stakeholders, clearly this is a key component of elaborating the investment plan, and especially because it's part of how to do good nature, people, and climate solution. You need to engage with people, because they know, because they will execute, because they will live through those solutions that you can include in the IP. So how we did that is, it was first to do a mapping of the key stakeholders and trying to have both the public, the private, the big, the small stakeholder, and the community. What kind of civil society organization could be representing, but ensuring that it's also a true representation. And then we have preliminary consultation and workshop, and we went on the field. Rodrigo showed one image of the entire team, government plus MDB plus consultant going to the field. But this is something that we have done repeatedly, and that we ensure that in each studies, in each consultancies that we were financing to prepare this IP, it was compulsory it was required for the consultant to do consultation, to go on the field, and to have this feedback from the people. This in order to co-create those solutions, and that's really something that we have been pushing from the beginning, and in the DR it's very easy because people are willing to participate. They have strong ideas, so it was really an enriching process. And so to have this co-creation of solutions, and so to always have continuous feedback mechanism with those people, and ensuring that everybody can appropriate and can make this investment plan his own plan. I end here. Thank you for the question. Coming back.
Thank you, Benoit. Thank you for that. Let me shift to Ellison. I want you to just add a little bit about engagement of stakeholders, and then much more on the next part of the question. And I would want to hear more, how did you manage as a lead MDB to partner with government effectively? Just to touch on that, but how much more, how are you aligning safe NPC financing with other World Bank support to the government of Rwanda? I would want to hear much more on that. Over to you, Ellison.
Thank you very much, Tembo and colleagues. And Emily presented very well both the beauty of Rwanda and all that's happening there, as well as some of the challenges that this program is trying to help overcome. I think on our side, we also very much want to thank the African Development Bank, the IFC, and all of the agencies, districts, and other stakeholders that were involved. They were very much hands-on and providing a lot of different input. I'll try to cover some of the questions here, as well as a couple that came in the chat, and I'm sure Emily will expand a lot on those. But one of the key things, and I think this Emily alluded to, is that Rwanda is a relatively small country. So there are a lot of opportunities to really leverage what's already happening through the GEF processes, through the GCF engagements that are underway, and Rwanda is leading some of this, including some of these same landscapes. And at the strategic level, the Rwanda Green Fund that has mobilized around $300 million in the last decade or so for climate and nature-related investments for Rwanda. They are also leading on a sustainable landscape management framework. So all of those pull in different tools, different institutional arrangements and capabilities to try to direct targeted nature-based solution funding for the country. So again, this program and this investment plan built on all of this. So that was a very successful effort. As Emily mentioned, it was about 2 years from the time that we submitted and we supported them on the submission of the EOI until actually, now where we're pushing forward with the actual implementation, preparations, and then hopefully deploying those funds quite soon. Yes, that is a long time, but at the same period, that's what it takes to engage all the stakeholders and pull in the different partners and make sure that it's strategic. And Rwanda does have a whole of government and whole of economy approach. So the decisions that had to be made around, how are these projects supporting the existing investments that are there, both on, they have different borrowing programs with the World Bank, technical assistance, as well as some other innovative ones that are mobilizing additional funds that are not impacting their balance sheet. But basically, a key one was to align this with the Volcanoes Community Resilience Project that Emily mentioned. And our colleague Hisham and Inez and the rest of the team, they're very active supporting the government of Rwanda on that flagship investment, which also pulls in pro-green and other financing. So that we had to align with those efforts and then ultimately go through the procurement process of bringing on a firm, which in this case it was Pegasus, that very actively supported the team on all of the different analysis, the stakeholder consultations, the important issues around the local communities and gender and other factors as well. And then finally, we collaborated with the African Parks Wildlife Conservation Society and a few other collaborators, including the World Resources Institute, WRI, to then, tap into some innovative efforts that the government of Rwanda led by their Ministry of Finance, Minecofin, and the Rwanda Green Fund, to try to continue on the innovation side. So that's what that wildlife conservation bond effort was about, and trying to mobilize additional resources from institutional investors and the capital markets. We had the pleasure also of visiting some small hydro operators that they are really keen on investing on some upstream interventions that will help with their hydro generation capacity. And lastly, I would mention that all of this is being done under a programmatic approach, which the government Rwanda is emphasizing. And, it ties in with more national level efforts, including development policy operations, that there's one ongoing now that's looking at the private sector engagement in this climate and nature effort, as well as, the tourism side, which again, this year, Rwanda is looking to bring in $800 million just from tourism. And 80% of all the tourists that go to Rwanda are engaged in nature-based solutions or nature-based tourism activities, whether it's for the gorilla, the chimpanzees, or some of these other efforts. So all of this combined, I think, is what we were trying to integrate. But first of all, safety, production of the land, and then linking in the climate smart agriculture and the other efforts that Emily has already alluded to. But back to you, Titembo. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellison and Benoit. You're both highlighting the processes that you've gone through, engaging not just the governments, the private sector, and all the colleagues that are necessary for the successful both the programming and also implementation of the plan. But I would like to question, and something that is coming from the colleagues on the ground in the meeting room. Could Rodrigo or Emily, either of you could pick it up? They would really want to understand more. How did we really engage the private sector? Ellison has touched on this a little bit, but could you give more of an in-depth? This keeps coming up on when it's a government-led process, we seem to be sidelining the private sector. So how did we engage them in the preparation, and how do we see them to be partners even in the implementation of the investment plan?
Can I come in? Okay. First of all, in the Yuna watershed, we identified several key private sector players and actors. And those actors are they understand well the interlinkages between their proper production methods and natural ecosystems. So they're prone to work with us and solving the problems to keep their own projects and businesses running, because they need the nature ecosystems and working for them and with them. So it was not very hard for us to contact them and to explain them what we were trying to do and to get them on board. And this also comes as a good explanation of a question that was on the chat on how are we going to keep part of this project running on the long term. Because we need to integrate the private sector, government, and putting people in the center of it, looking to take care of nature in a sustainable way, so nature can take care of them as well. And practices like the one we discussed in both IPs, like sustainable ecotourism, can lead a way forward with this and other sustainable agricultural processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Maybe I can also add one more thing to that. For us in Rwanda, excuse the noise, we had the power outage in Kigali, but for us, we in both the scoping and the joint mission, there was the IFC presence, which kind of represented the voice of the private sector. And actually what we found is that, we also need to redefine what private sector means. So small-scale farmers in Rwanda are that's majority of the farmers. So the more logical route to go is within cooperatives and land consolidation. And with that, once they do that, to have access to markets, and also bring in the Ministry of Infrastructure on board to really be able to make to have feeder roads from the villages to the markets. So really changing that perspective of, IFC, it's all about economies of scale for them, and really in a country like Rwanda, maybe the reality needs to be slightly adjusted. So that's just what I wanted to add on. Thank you.
Thank you both for adding those, for responding to those questions. And we are glad that the chat box is very active and we keep receiving very excellent questions. So I'll still come back to you both colleagues, but I would also invite the MDB colleagues, both Ellison and Benoit, to join in responding to this. So one of the things everyone is asking that on arriving at the components, how did you arrive at that? And how did you prioritize which nature-based solutions are going to be employed in those components so that the pillars are very clear, they're integrated, they're speaking to each other, and they'll lead to the goal which you want to achieve, and then at the same time arriving at the broad goals of the nature program for the safe. Kindly give as much information as possible because all the countries, apart from the two of you, are still in the process of developing the IPs and would really love to hear more on how this was actualized. So either the MDBs could start or our government colleagues could give it a head start.
So maybe I'll jump in. I know my colleague Benoit speaks very well, and maybe he'll come in French, which I won't understand. But anyhow, what I can mention real quick, and again, our friend Emily can expand on, is as everybody knows, and Paul mentioned this, right? It's the sausage making. So obviously the country has a lot of different issues and priorities that's trying to push out. It has the geographical efforts going on there across the provinces and districts. And, at the same time, all the issues that the CIF and other partners want us to address, it can really make this very complex, right? You can have 10 different components and you're probably not highlighting things enough. But, what we had to do is working with all the stakeholders, try to really simplify, what were those key messages and those key efforts that really touched on the core themes of the program. The nature, the people, and the climate aspects. Fortunately, as we mentioned before, we had the Volcanoes project that is a flagship project for the World Bank, 50 million in IDA investment there. And it dealt with the exact same issues. And that was call it entry point for some of these investments. Clearly, there isn't a component there that's looking at a wildlife bond issuance, but the funds of what those bonds are trying to raise, the foregone coupons, are also very much nature-based solutions. So that was what really allowed us to keep it simple. So I would say that the broad coverage that the NPC program provides and the very detailed guidelines that are shared, and again, Paul being in the field and in the country with us and the rest of the team really helped us to simplify things and consolidate where possible. The World Bank itself also has gone through a big effort around taking all of the corporate indicators and from 100 plus to now we have around 20. So that also was very helpful in trying to say, okay, these investments, how is it going to be aligned to these main outcomes that we're trying to achieve? And then at the end of the day, bringing it back to what this particular investment plan has and the projects that are being developed from those project briefs. So let me stop there, and I'm sure Benoit can elaborate a lot more on what IDB did well.
Thanks. Thanks, Alison. So I will continue with my bad English, so you will have to suffer it a little bit more. And Rodrigo, please, you complement me, of course. I think that what was successful in the Dominican Republic is that we did the prioritization of components not based on how to allocate funding, but based on objectives. So we started with a very in-depth diagnosis of the territory where we wanted to work, where the government decided to focus. It's a watershed. And we use CIF grant money to do the different studies that were necessary to have a good diagnosis, and so to be able all together to agree on clear objective and organizing with a clear general objective and some specific objective. And then we had a sort of strategic and efficiency criteria on how to allocate the money in order to achieve those objectives. But we were not discussing how to allocate money based on money, but based on what can be achieved, we can mobilize, and how we can be sure that we will, at the end, using co-financing, achieve those objectives. And here I join Alison. Here the CIF has very good processes. First, they come and support. It was great to have Paul on the ground, but also to have other colleagues from CIF connected and helping that. But they have a clear process with this scoping mission, joint mission 1, joint mission 2. So we use a scoping mission to scope and really to identify, given the territory, what were the studies that were needed in order to have a good diagnosis. And so how we could, during the joint mission 1, agree on general objective and key specific objective. And this joint mission 1 was based on the, I would say, preliminary, but actually quite advanced result of those different studies that we identified during the scoping mission. So in the joint mission 1, we were able to agree on objectives, specific, general, and so to have a first idea of what could be at the end the investment plan. But it's only during this joint mission 2 that we finalize the allocation of money, the prioritization of activity within component, etc., and we fine-tune things. I will stop here. Hope it helps.
Super helpful, and I'm enjoying your English, Benoit. Excellent.
Can I comment?
Jump in.
In my bad English as well. It was a process with a lot of going back and forward between a lot of actors, and the lead bank and the World Bank were very generous in trying to keep us in a tight format to move forward in an organized way, and I thank both institutions for it.
Thank you for emphasizing that engagement with stakeholders is critical and it's not a one-off show. So there's continuous engagement until you arrive at an agreement, so that everybody understands what the objectives are, how we all collectively are going to arrive at those objectives. So we need to be mindful that that is critical, and it's important that everyone understands from the gap analysis, the diagnostic studies that we're supposed to do, how this is supposed to take us to a common place and agree that this is how we're going to move forward. But I still keep receiving very excellent questions from the chat, and I'm back at you, colleagues, to ask first, how did you balance? I know we've touched on this a little bit, but it would be good to hear how the conflicting interests between the people who surround these watersheds or who surround these areas of interventions and nature within the IP, how that has been addressed. And if you could also touch on how you mainstream the DGM, the dedicated grant mechanism process within the IP to achieve the objectives of the IP, I would appreciate that. Probably Emily and Rodrigo could give a head start on both of these questions.
Thank you, Chitembo. So maybe just to be clear, so the DGM is separate from what we presented at the CIF Trust Fund Committee. So it's totally separate funding. Again, direct access for the locals. Us, Rwanda Green Fund is government. So that's the 31 million. And for the 31 million, half of it is a concessional loan and the other half is a grant because we're in the AIDA country. So maybe for people to understand that these are two very different things, but Alison, you're the expert, so please come in.
Yeah, no, you're very right, Emily. So I think that, again, what's great about this program is that you do have this dedicated grant mechanism, right, to really engage and really do a lot with the local communities. So that is a new process that our social specialists are going to be leading in support of the broader efforts. But during the consultation processes and, the meetings we had, an opportunity to be out in the field there, we were able to engage and discuss with different partners as well. So, I think that will be a really important element that can make a big difference. And that's in addition to these, I would say, very core funding that's needed to then bring on, more private sector investments and more initiatives, as we were saying. And just to touch on Chitembo's question there, I would say that, yes, there is a conflict, right, of the people and the nature. But in reality, I think there's also a lot of awareness and understanding that you need to take care of the nature, because otherwise you won't have the food, you won't have the water, you will be suffering from landslides and losing all of your crops, your house, etc. And if you look at the geology there in Rwanda, you will see how this is super important. So there is a big commitment. So I would say that a lot of the communities and others are actually embracing the nature aspects, as opposed to thinking that we don't need it, because again, parts of Rwanda they have lost 93% of its forest areas in some specific forests. So now it's a big effort to rebuild, and that commitment is there, and they've seen how it's worked. So I think that is the commitment. Obviously, you need to deliver on the food security, on the risk mitigation from these landslides and other issues. But this is a big opportunity there for the country and the people.
Thanks to both of you for responding to those questions, and I hope we're all getting great insights that we can use and adapt in our different countries where we're developing the IPs. Very good lessons that our colleagues have learned. I just want to go back to ask Rodrigo. You did mention that you engage the private sector as one of contributing to ensuring the sustainability of the program. In your engagement with the private sector, in as much as that is the goal of the government, that they should contribute to the sustainability of the investment program implementation beyond the lifespan of the project, what kind of questions were coming out, or how did you just use that? And the reason this question keeps coming up, I believe from the chat from colleagues, is we've had challenges in the past in especially resilience programming to bring the private sector on board. So your insights of how you did this, or on how did you manage to do this? What kind of questions were coming up? What kind of conflicts could likely arise between government to implement and the private sector to implement this, and how this is really going to result in sustainability of the investments? Those insights will be helpful for everyone. Rodrigo?
I was just about to write my answer to that on the chat box, so I'll go ahead and read it, and I'll place it just after that. first of all, this is not a process that is done with. This is an ongoing process. And we understood what the projects private sector already had and what their interests were. And we continue to count on them with, for the implementation of the project part. So this is something that is not done. This is something that is ongoing. Then responding to the questions on the chat box, which projects did we try and get them on board? There are conservation efforts that are already underway, and the important thing is to create the necessary synergies to create the greatest impact possible. Also, keep in mind that once you have a holistic project of a certain scale, people want to understand how they can be integrated into it and how they can find complementarities with what they're already doing. So I urge you to seek as many shareholders as possible in your defined landscape and to explain this process as many times as possible in order to see where these interlinkages are, where the synergies are. So this is a knock on the door process and trying to get as many actors involved as possible. I hope this answered the questions.
Yes, Rodrigo, and Beno, you would have wanted to add to that, but if not, I would want, go ahead, Beno.
No, so I will just add, and it's to complement what Rodrigo was doing, is that there is also, and it was really a push by the government, and it was very, very, very good. There is also this, so we will use part of the CIF money as a seed money for innovative financing that will allow through payment for environmental services. I think that you call it like that in English, pago por servicio ambiental. Just payment for environmental services that will also allow to mobilize more private investment for financing activity investment in nature-based solutions. And here I will join what Emily was saying at one moment. When we call about private sectors, often we need to differentiate between the small farmers that can't implement solution based on nature, etc., if they receive support, capacity, and financing from the bigger private actors like in the electricity sectors or in the mining sectors, etc., that do use those ecosystemic services and have the capacity to finance the restoration, protection, creation of those ecosystemic services. And that's why this payment for environmental services, which is quite innovative, at least in the DR context, will be promoted, created, reinforced through the CIF investment plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chitembo.
Thank you. Yes, Alessandro.
Yeah, sorry, just one minor addition to there, just to say, again, the focus is on nature, people and climate, right? But, you know, there needs to be opportunities for people to generate income and providing, you know, the economy. So one of the things that...
Could we kindly mute ourselves, please? Kindly mute, we are getting feedback. Ellison, go ahead.
Okay. No, so just to say that, you know, a place like Nyangwe, which will benefit, it's on the southern province and a bit on the western province as well. It actually, these ecosystem services that Benoit was referring to, It provides about 70% of the water for Kigali, right, the capital city. So when we're saying that, you know, it's tourism or it's this and that, it's the reality. You're trying to protect all of these natural resources so that they can deliver these ecosystem services. And a lot of this work around the buffer zones, including some of the wetlands, it actually has a big impact on you know, these ecosystem services that are delivered, and also helps to consolidate some of the activities that are being done by these local community members, so that hopefully they also increase their yield and get better products out to market. So just wanted to emphasize that it's not a standalone, and you know, it's not promoting mass tourism to you know, going to places where that's not happening now.
Great. I know we are receiving again very great insights from the team, but one more question to all of you is how did you see ecotourism integrated in nature as a nature-based solution? How does that work out? And with this, I'll come back with the last question, because my time is telling me that we're really running out, but I wish we could really have extra more time, because it's very interesting and we're getting a very engaging team, participants who are really asking very relevant questions. And there's some questions which I'll come back to you, because I would want to save the panel. They're coming from individual countries and not running regional programs, but we might give a few insights there. So how does ecotourism work out as a nature-based solution? How did we say that? Benoit, I'll ask you to jump in there, then colleagues would follow suit.
So I will try to be short. So ecotourism or sustainable tourism is a key component of the investment plan as part of the third pillar we have in this investment plan, with the objective of economic diversification. Basically, the diagnosis that we had was that there is a vicious circle between the degradation of ecosystemic services and poverty. And so all the IP track to, and this vicious circle is reinforced by climate change. So the IP look to break this vicious circle, attacking the ecosystemic services and the degradation, so through restoration, protection, etc., and attacking the poverty part of this circle. And so economic diversification and tourism in the DR, obviously, it's an important solution, and here bringing nature-based solution make fully sense. I stop.
Thank you, Ellison. I'll ask you just one last question, which should be representative of both governments and both. What are the next steps now that the IPs have been developed? In under a minute, I would appreciate that.
So that was to me, Chitemo. Okay, great. So we have two parallel tracks here. One is for the wildlife conservation bond. We're going through the review stages here and trying to secure the last outcome payer, and so to make that bond a reality. And we're looking to do that over the next couple of months, and then if all goes well, the funding will be secured to actually launch the bond early in the new year. Separately, the larger project, the 29 million that Emily alluded to, that's being processed under the VCRP project, the Volcanoes project, and that does streamline the processing on our side. So we're waiting for one other large co-financier of the project come through, and then we'll process that as additional finance under the VCRP, and it'll be integrated into the implementation schedule. So that should be happening over the next few months as well.
Thank you very much to our experts and to the participants that have been sending us very good questions and have been very engaging. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and it's been a whole lot of questions from engaging the stakeholders, government taking the lead, working with the MDBs, ensuring that we choose the right very vulnerable landscapes, and we concentrate our resources there and our efforts so that we maximize the outcomes of the investments, ensuring that we bring on board other financiers in doing this process. How do we engage the private sector? It's been a whole lot of a menu that our colleagues have shared with us, and we are glad that we've listened, we've heard, they've given their time to share the experience, and we hope that this is helpful to everyone. With that, I just want to thank you, the panelists, and invite my colleague Amita to take us to the next stage. Thank you. Amita, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tembo. My name is Amita. I'm the lead coordinator for the Nature People Climate Learning Platform, which was introduced earlier by Paul, but one of the main objectives is to facilitate exchange between countries working on nature-based solutions, which is why this event was organized. And we're hoping that the participation is a representation that this was needed and it was useful. So thank you all for joining. Before we let you all go, we do want to get some feedback to inform some of our future events. So I'm going to launch a poll and hopefully get some feedback from you all that we can use to design and inform our future events. And while you're all responding to that, I just want to say this was a Nature Series event, which is a part of a series of events that the CIF organizes around building understanding on nature-based solutions. We have others in the past that are recorded on our YouTube page. That's where this recording will go as well. And we will have more, hopefully using some of the feedback that you give us using this poll. We're so open to suggestions and requests on what topics we should cover, whether we should have more follow-ups on these as we move towards the IP submissions in the next few months. And with that, we're right about on time. So thank you so much to the speakers and the panelists. We really, really appreciate you taking out the time to share your expertise. Thank you to the CIF team for organizing this event. And thank you so much to the participants.
Thank you, everyone. We will try and get to some of these questions as well that we weren't able to answer and send responses back if possible. Thanks, everybody.